Kia ora, everyone. Welcome back to This Is Our Story. You've got me again doing the intro. Welcome back to Kieran.
Well, hello there, and thanks for having me.
We're not going to waste any time this time.
No time to waste. No dallying.
We're going to jump straight into story time. And Kieran was wanting to talk a little bit about some of his hobbies. I feel like mine have sort of been the same over the years, so I don't know how interesting mine will be, but tell us a bit about yours over the years, Kieran.
Well, I was just reflecting as we were reflecting just offline. Isn't it funny how, well, when you're young, you just have shitloads of hobbies. It's like we never have any free time, right?
Yeah.
And then the older you get, the more time technically you have to kind of spend doing quote unquote fun stuff. And yet we don't. All these hobbies just kind of fall away and we end up just, I don't know, sleeping and doom scrolling on Instagram or watching Netflix.
That's a hobby though, isn't it?
I mean, I did actually have quite a few different hobbies over the years. When I was young, I was very into, I don't know when this began, but I was really into collecting stamps. I had a big collection of stamps, and my grandma would pass on any stamps that she came across. Even years after I stopped being interested in them, she'd still pass me her collection of stamps. I still have them somewhere. I think that's probably when it stopped, when I figured out that collecting stamps was the least cool thing you could possibly do. I don't think it was ever cool.
No.
I also had a coin collection. I still have those, actually, with some old coins, a couple of 100 years old, actually. I got into comics for a while, which we touched on. I really loved reading, of course, but
I used to steal your comics all the time.
Yeah. Well, I used to collect these particular war comics for many, many years. I had hundreds of them, with the Commando comics, which we have mentioned before. What else have I got here? Oh, yeah, whales. I was really into whales. Still love whales, but perhaps not as passionately. In fact, I was really, really into Greenpeace back in the 80s until Mum had a awakening that perhaps Greenpeace, they probably weren't the best role models for a young person when they started getting all militant and questionable in the way that they protested and things. But that's what actually precipitated our visit to rescuing those beached whales when we were very young, which was a pretty cool memory.
It was a core memory. I'll never forget that.
Yeah, it was really cool. In the far north, up near Kaitaia, I seem to remember some pilot whales.
Yeah, the army trucks, I think they beached themselves, and we were able to sit on the back of the army trucks, and I don't know how they got them on the trucks or something, didn't they? I can't remember.
Yeah, very, very, very vague memories.
But we had to keep them wet. That was our job. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. Anyway, apart from that, also was really into models, except it kind of fell over because I loved
like Pamela Anderson style.
Well, can you imagine me sneaking a poster of Pamela Anderson into the house? Probably not. I was far too geeky for hot models. Only the plastic type. Although, to be fair, Pamela's probably also a bit plastic. So
yeah, 50% plastic.
No, I was into crafting war models. I used to get the kits and then glue them all together. And then I did try painting them at one stage, but I was such a perfectionist back then that I just gave up very, very quickly, because if I ever went over or painted the wrong part with a different color, I was like, fuck. And I'll just basically never touch it again. But yeah, I spent quite a bit of mum and dad's money on those models.
You used to do them with balsa wood ones too, didn't you?
I made a few planes, yeah. I don't think it was very good, to be honest. I was just more into the war aspect of the whole thing. Once I got older into my teenage years, those things just kind of fell away when I realized they weren't exactly conducive to making friends. But I probably just focused more on playing a lot of different sports. And then, of course, once I got into music, that was most of my time and energy. And of course, once I got into church as well, because church took up so much time, I didn't really have a lot of spare time to focus on other random pursuits. And I don't think it even really bothered me at the time. Just was all focused on being on fire for Jesus. So, I mean,
I think mine, have been pretty steadfast throughout my whole life, and no surprises, it was horses, and my room was covered in ceiling to floor with horse posters. And I used to
you'd get the magazines and then rip them apart.
Every month I had a magazine subscription, and I used to pull out. They had the center part of the magazine.
Horse and Pony, was it?
Yeah, pull out the center of it with all the posters and get them straight up on my wall. Actually, I have got some photos of my room with some. Maybe I'll share that on the podcast Instagram. But yeah, that's kind of been my my hobbies throughout my whole life. But other than that, sort of more into my adulthood, I guess I got into just a love of
drinking,
exploring, and yes, as you heard in the last one, since I left home. Although after that last story I told, I kind of went off it for a little bit, understandably. But yeah, just when I first moved to London, it was just so exciting exploring. I guess you can call that a hobby. Just we had a love of adventure, instilled in us from young children. So, and I kind of got into fitness a bit too, whereas I'd never, ever, ever, ever been into fitness before. Any kind of exercise, I'd be like, ugh.
You were like the anti-sport person.
Yes. And I was always a bigger girl when I was younger too, and I just was like, never the one picked for the teams of anything in school, I was okay with that because I didn't want to play anyway. But yeah, that's pretty much sort of been my hobby throughout.
Well, I suppose like we can probably segue straight into the episode proper. We've got quite a lot to cover, so I don't want to hang around in this part of the episode for too long. But we're just going to start with you, Briar, because when we finished up with your last part of the story, you had just moved from Perth to London. The last thing we heard from you was that you'd gone from a 40-degree day to a 0-degree day arriving in London. Yeah. So I don't know, just carry on from there and tell us a little bit about what your experience was when you first landed. How did you feel when you first got to London? You kind of were upsizing, going obviously to Perth, but then going from Perth to London it's another world in many, many different shapes and forms. Yeah,
and it was actually quite a culture shock too. Like, you think they're both Western countries, right? But it actually was so different to anything I'd experienced before, even in Perth. I think it was like the week before Christmas we arrived, and so there was just this buzz in the air. It was cold, and the first time experiencing, like a winter Christmas, which is part of the reason why we were insisting on leaving Perth to go to London, was so we could have we dream about a white Christmas. And we went down like Oxford Street, which if you don't know London, it's like the busiest street in London probably.
Especially at that time of year.
Yeah, and the streets are fully decorated. Like the English really get into Christmas. So that was just like, I was like a deer in headlights. It was like, whoa, going down there. Like you couldn't even walk on the streets. There was that many people, just you sort of had to elbow your way through the crowds. But it was so exciting. And I was with my husband at the time, and we were staying with his sister who had lived there for quite a few years, and she'd recently just had a child, might have been her second child, I can't remember. And so we were staying with them for the first month, but it got a bit awkward because I guess they wanted their space back, and I think we'd outstayed our welcome a little bit, but we were struggling to find an apartment, and we didn't have any money, to be honest. We stupidly moved, because although we were earning good money in Perth, we were stupid. We just spent it all pretty much before we got there.
Did you actually go there with any kind of plan about what you were going to do?
No, not a whole lot. I mean, we were still young, so we were just like, let's just wing it. It'll be fine. We've got family there. And to be honest, we wouldn't have survived if it wasn't for his family. So we spent the first month there, and then we were struggling to find an apartment or a place to live because you had to put like quite a large deposit. So in the UK, people get paid monthly. So you pay all your bills monthly. So usually all the flats or accommodation, you had to pay like a month's worth of rent and then 2 weeks in advance, blah, blah, blah. So it was a huge amount of money. And going from obviously dollars to pounds, that cut what little money we had in half anyway at that time. So we were struggling. And then my husband's sister said, look, we'll pay for your first month's rent. Basically, if you get out of our house now, we'll pay for the. But it was so stressful. So we still couldn't find anywhere. And in the end, we spent like a week or 2 weeks in not a hotel, like I don't know, this really nasty, grimy, let's call it like a motel, but it was basically an old house or like a bed and breakfast kind of thing without the breakfast. It was gross anyway, and it was cold, and it was so expensive. We spent 2 weeks there and managed to find somewhere.
So how long were you staying with his sister?
For a month.
A month, right?
Yeah. And
so it's like right in the middle of winter. And I mean, I've been there in wintertime. It's pretty dark and depressing. And I mean, it's all kind of romantic at first, but then especially in that kind of situation, I don't know, did you feel any regrets about being there?
I guess we both kind of realised we probably should have waited longer in Perth before. But given the situation in Perth, that we'd had a falling out with my auntie and we didn't want to be in that position anymore, I think that motivated us to try and leave as soon as we could. And we just fell in from one bad situation to another, really. So they lived outside of London in Essex, which they lived in a very affluent area. Her husband was like a vascular surgeon, good money. They had good money. So it offered to pay for a month's worth of rent for us, and we were very grateful. And in the end, we did find somewhere, thank goodness. And it wasn't the most ideal place. We were flatting with other people. And it was in an area of London, East London, which wasn't that desirable, a bit of a dodgy area, but we sort of settled in anyway and struggled to find work to begin with. And so the first 6 months actually was quite hard living in London. And there was times in those first 6 months where you'd be looking on the street for coins or money that people had dropped. And back then you could survive pretty cheaply, like £10 could have bought us nearly a week's worth of like a week's worth of groceries. Like we were eating, say, porridge for dinner. Like it was fucking tough. Like those
pretty dire.
Yeah, like we would buy stuff like really cheap stuff like bread and porridge and until we got work, which took a lot longer than we thought.
So how long were you both out of work?
I got work before my husband. He was a cabinet maker, so his took a lot longer, whereas I was a qualified nanny, so I got work reasonably quickly, but it was like not ideal. It was part-time, so it wasn't earning a lot, and the first couple of jobs I had was like as a live-in nanny, which again wasn't ideal. So I would live with the family during the week, and in the weekend I would come home, and that was stressful for both of us. And I don't know, maybe that sort of caused a little bit of separation in a way. Like we'd been apart from each other a lot. And that was hard. When you first move to a big city, you don't know anyone and you don't know the city at all. So that was really hard. But, we experienced a lot of snow over winter. That was cool. And the people we were flatting with, we made friends with. So at the end of the month, when you'd get paid, you pay rent, and then you'd go to the pub and have a pint. And so it was very up and down. It took us a while to settle in, actually. And my husband at the time became quite depressed. He found it harder to make friends than I did, and some really very low times. And for myself, I'm more of a naturally more upbeat personality, and his personality was quite drab and had the tendency towards being down and negative. And And so when you're trying to, in a relationship, uphold somebody else as well as yourself,
Mm.
You can sort of, it only goes so far.
Well, it's quite exhausting.
It is. It's absolutely exhausting. And
then, in a sense, like being in a place like London, for myself, having done that, when you are that type of personality, it can be really tough, and that's why a lot of English people are quite low key, right? They aren't very peppy, and there is something to be said about being in an environment that is sunny and that you can stay out late at night in the sunshine.
Yeah, and I know people talk about it a lot, about England being grey and drab, and it does affect your mood, whether you realise it or not. It really does. And the winters are long. It gets dark around 3 or 4 p.m. Doesn't get light till around 8, so the hours of light are quite short. And when we'd just come from Perth, which is like forever sunny and hot, and it was tough. It was really, really tough. And
so how long did it take until you felt like it's got some kind of momentum?
So we moved the end of 2008. I would say at least, I want to say a year even before we felt kind of like, we both had stable jobs and we had a decent apartment and we're starting to make friends. I wouldn't say fully settled, but it definitely felt like it took a year to, sort of feel like our feet were on the ground.
So what were some of I mean, obviously it got pretty dark then as well, but what were some of the highlights of those first couple of years living there?
So in the first, I don't know how we afforded it, but in the first 6 months we managed to book a trip to Turkey, to Gallipoli. I'm sure most people will know the history around Gallipoli for New Zealanders and Australians, where there was a battle and they fought the Turks. New Zealand and Australia together fought the Turks. A lot of people died, and anyway, so they every year on Anzac Day, which was April 25th, people come together from all over the world, Kiwis and Aussies and the Turks as well, to Gallipoli, and we commemorate those who have died, and it's an experience I will never ever forget. Like you stay the night there, so we took our sleeping bags and we slept outside, and it was freezing, so cold. But there's like thousands of people there, and you all just sleep on this hillside, and they have this big open air screen where they play throughout the night. They play like documentaries and things around that war. That battle, and then you do the long walk to, is it Chinook Bear? And during the day it's very, very hot too, and you had to carry your sleeping bags and all your gear. But yeah, you're awake for the dawn service, and wow, that was just so emotional. They play what's it called? The Last Post.
The Last Post, yeah.
Yeah, The Last Post, which is, it's so emotional. Just even talking about it just makes you sort of get goosebumps, like hearing, you're in that place where all these people died, and hearing that
thousands of people in total silence.
Yes. It was incredible. I mean, what an experience. So we after we went to Gallipoli, we spent a bit of time in Turkey, and Turkey's actually a really cool country. Went to a few places there and stayed, but yeah, I don't know how we afforded that in the first 6 months of being there, because honestly things were so tight.
Must have collected a lot of coins.
Yes. But honestly, it was so worth it, and I would love to have gone back again, to be honest. It was just amazing.
Because I remember one of the things that your partner and I had in common was this interest in war, and we talked about this a lot, and history. And so he was really big into visiting old battlefields and things, which I remember talking about, and I was quite jealous that you guys got to go on this one, and then following trips as well, I think, to like Normandy and stuff. Yeah. I was really interested in that kind of thing. I've just never had a chance to do it myself. But yeah, Anzac Day is a really big deal, and it's commemorated all across New Zealand and Australia at the same time as in Turkey.
Yeah, and we met quite a few friends and stuff on that trip, some Kiwis and Aussies. So actually that helped us immensely. When we got back to London, we met up with these people again and again, and we built some really firm friendships. So that following year was a lot of fun, actually. that was probably a good year, I'd say, 2009. Lots of, going out and drinking, because that's kind of the culture with Kiwis and Aussies. And but that was okay. We were exploring a new city, meeting these people, and it was just a fun year. And that's when I'd got a better job, and my husband did as well. So things were starting to, sort of a year down the line, start to feel a bit normal, for want of a better word.
Yeah. Well, I mean, meanwhile, we're going to switch back to my story to kind of cover those same couple of years that you were kind of settling into London life. So as I covered in the last episode, my partner and I had been in Sydney for a year, 2009. And then at the end of 2009, we moved down to Melbourne to start a new life. And I don't know, it feels weird to talk about it now, but we did move around a crazy amount. And we just kind of seemed to do it on a whim. But anyway, we got to Melbourne. I don't remember much of the first time except when we first got there, but we didn't have jobs sorted out yet from memory. My partner did end up getting a teaching job. It was part-time or maternity fill-in or something. And I couldn't find work. And we had similar situation in terms of I just couldn't get any work. Because I'd abandoned teaching, had already decided I wasn't going back to it. It just meant trying to get just any old random job. And I just really, really struggled. Isn't it funny? Like when you're kind of technically overqualified for all these things and you just cannot get even the most basic job. But I did a little bit of like removals type work just to get some cash. We ran out of money a couple of times. In fact, once we paid our last rent, and then we literally had no money left. Wow. There was like nothing, absolutely nothing. And we had no money for groceries or anything. And then someone that we had met at a local church that we had joined, because the thing is, when you're in Christianity, if you move to a new city, one of the first things you do is to try and find a church. And we did find this small church that we ended up staying in, and someone from that church came and just bought a whole load of groceries and filled up our fridge. It was like pretty awesome. Like, I mean, say what you want about religion, but it has some good people, right? But momentum kind of built very, very slowly. And so 2010 was a very slow year for me. At some point, I think... Well, I mean, I'd already decided to go back to uni when I moved to Melbourne. And I had applied for both Sydney Uni and Monash University in Melbourne at the same time. And basically my application was accepted for Monash. And that's what kind of sealed the deal for moving to Melbourne. Funnily enough, I did get accepted to Sydney, but it came through a little bit too late. So I've always wondered, how might my life have been if I'd got that.
But everything happens for a reason, though, right?
Totally.
I believe that.
Yeah, totally. It was just we just took a completely different path to what it would have been. Anyway, so Melbourne life, though, I went to Monash. It was quite weird going back to uni again because I was, 24, 25, but technically a mature age student, which was wild. I really enjoyed it the second time around because I knew what I was doing. And my only problem was that in that first year, I worked extra hard when I didn't really need to. Because, first year of uni, it's like no one really focuses in the first year. They're all off partying or whatever, except for me because I'm quote unquote mature. So I remember putting in shitloads of work for these like 500 word essays, which is, nothing.
Nothing, yeah.
Yeah. I made a lot of friends at uni, which is pretty cool. And it's probably the one thing that I miss the most about being in a university environment is the ease of which you make friends. Yeah, met some really cool people that kind of stayed with me and still am kind of loosely friends with as well. So that was really cool. But about halfway through the year, this opportunity came up to do some study abroad through Monash University. So Monash, at least at the time, would give $2,000 to people to go overseas and study at a list of different universities at different parts of the world. And I was like, yeah, oh my God, this is like finally the opportunity I get to go overseas and get paid for it. It's like my dream scenario, right? And I mean, I was, as soon as I heard about it, I was like, holy shit, like, yes. I didn't even really think about it. But of course, I had to convince my partner, who was
her
actually,
thoughts on it?
she was very against it. As you can imagine, she was a very practically minded person. So,
And she didn't really like change, though, did she, either?
Yeah, I mean, if she was very sensible, and I have my moments of being sensible, but I'm probably more on the impulsive side. So I was pretty set on going for the sake of adventure, and there were many, many conversations and disagreements, and then being open to it, and then changing mind, and just going through all the very practical step-by-step things that would need to happen if we actually went for this.
So how did she come round to the idea then? What was the clinching factor?
I don't know. I think so. I applied for this. It was a grant from Monash, and in the end I got it because it was based on your application and then based on GPA. And I had a good GPA. Strangely enough, strange what happens when you put extra work in at uni. And I think that was the clincher because it was the money. It was a practical thing that helped seal the deal. I mean, $2,000 is nothing to be sniffed at, right?
Especially
and that
back
doesn't
then.
go. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't go far in pounds, but it's it's not bad. And I think for me, as I'd already shared, I have always wanted to be far afield and see the world, right? And I was afraid at this point that I was never ever going to get that chance to do it. And so it was just lots of lobbying on my part, trying to convince my partner that we could actually do it.
Was that supposed to be for like a year, or was it just?
Well, it was only a semester.
Oh, okay.
It was just one semester, so like it wasn't really a big deal. I didn't think so at the time. And so in the end we committed to it, and the knowledge that we were going to come back to Melbourne, and that I guess that was the deal, coming back to Melbourne. I think in my heart, I didn't really want to come back. I mean, we'd only been in Melbourne, less than a year by the time we confirmed this. So in terms of Melbourne, the place, I liked it. It was a cool place, but I didn't really know it very well. We lived right on the edge of the city, so I didn't get to go and see much of it. When I was going to uni, to Monash University, Monash is quite far out from the CBD, so I wasn't really seeing much of what Melbourne had to offer. My partner wasn't really into going out and exploring in the same way that I was. Like, for instance, for me, Melbourne's full of amazing cafes and restaurants and things, right? It's what it's famous for. She wasn't really into that. So
she wasn't really into anything.
No, she wasn't. I was just trying to think, what was she into? Yeah.
Full time.
Not a lot. Well, her school was right on the edge of Melbourne, out in Lilydale, which is so far. Like, no one comes out there. Like if you make a friend in the city, they're not going to come all the way to Lilydale to say hi. It's so far out. I wouldn't say we really did a lot in that first year. So I was desperately keen to get out and actually see the world. Anyway, we get to the end of 2010, getting ready to go and getting all packed up. And I'm like super excited, man. Super excited. I don't remember the details of that first packing up experience. I don't think we would have had much stuff, but we had to leave our cat behind. That was probably the most traumatic part of the thing. But I think that was the only thing that was slightly hard to move on from, was saying goodbye to the cat. Anyway, end of 2010, it was December 2010, just after Christmas it must have been. Jeez, I should remember this. I'm pretty sure it was just after Christmas. And I remember so clearly flying into Heathrow and it just being terrible weather. I couldn't even see the ground because it was so foggy, and it looked pretty damn miserable. But the thing is, I just did not care. I was so excited. And I don't really know how my partner felt. I don't think she felt the same excitement as I did, for sure. But I remember getting off. I don't remember. I think you might have met. I think you met us at the airport. Your partner,
Yeah, I think,
you and your partner, and then we took the train back. So at this stage, you were living in East London, and we went with you on the train, and that takes fucking ages.
Yeah, it does. It's like an hour and a half or something from Heathrow.
Yeah, on the what's the line? The purple. Is it purple? Anyway, the blue one, that goes all the way to
Victoria
the
line.
And you know what? I didn't care. I was loving the whole every damn minute. It was fucking freezing. It was really, really cold. Anyway, we got back to your apartment, and I was just like on cloud nine. Every tiny little detail of just, even though East London is probably, at least at that stage, this is pre-Olympics, so it was like the most boring place to go. There was nothing to see, but everything was just, I was wide-eyed, you know. Everything
Even
felt
just
so
going on the
different.
tube would have been exciting because it's a first.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that when you go to a place that you've dreamed about forever and you've read about and you've watched in movies, and I think there's some people might find it disappointing to go somewhere like that and see it in real life. But for me, it was just a real dream coming true. And I didn't need it to be amazing because I didn't have high expectations of what it was. All I wanted to do was just experience it. And it was just like breathing in new air. It just felt very, very alive. Those first few days, I don't remember. We stayed with you for maybe a couple of weeks. I don't know.
I can't even remember that, but.
So my partner was looking for work. She was trying to find teaching work in London, which was quite a challenge. We were also trying to find apartments, and can totally relate to how difficult it was and how expensive it was. I was starting at uni. So the uni that I was at was King's College, London, which the further apart I've been from it, the more privileged I feel to have gone there, actually. It's quite prestigious in the UK, and beautiful place. Oh my God. Like, I feel so privileged, #blessed, to have experienced that, because it's right in Waterloo. It's right center of London, center of so many different things that are famous and special about London. And going to the uni itself was really overwhelming, because I think I didn't really have a lot of confidence then to kind of introduce myself and try and make friends. So I did kind of stand around on the periphery quite awkwardly, quite often, hoping that people would just walk over and say hi. But people don't really do that in the UK.
No.
And the study experience there was very different, because in Monash, it was so easy. Like back in Australia, I was just getting high distinctions all the time. But I felt like sometimes they weren't even looking at my essays very closely, because I was just getting these good grades with, I won't say little work, because I did obviously work hard, but it was really, really difficult to do well at this uni. And the amount of reading I was given, it was insane. Yeah, it was really quite overwhelming. But the coolest thing was, I would have my lectures. So just to explain, at this stage at uni, I was doing a Bachelor of Arts with the aim of heading into archaeology. So that's the kind of nerd that I was, right? So my first year at Monash, I was studying history and ancient history and geology, with heading down this archaeology route. So when I was in London, I was kind of doing more of those ancient history papers. So I'd sit through these lectures, which were amazing, and then I would just walk out and just purposely get myself lost in London. I would walk and walk and walk until I had no idea where I was, and then just refine myself. And I found all these cool like little museums and these just cool buildings and that I could explore. And it was amazing. It was the best experience. But like on top of all of this was, all this other stuff that was going on at home too, right? So we did eventually find an apartment, and we ended up living with one of our friends from Melbourne, who just happened to be there. And
so you were flatting with them?
Yeah, so we all got this new apartment together in West London, and it was it's always a challenge living with other people,
especially
but
when
it's
you've
even
been
more of a
on your own.
challenge. Yeah, but I mean, it's always a challenge living with someone else and trying to kind of pretend that there aren't all these kind of issues going on.
Mm.
We would have, my partner and I, in continuation of what had been happening before, we would have these disagreements about all sorts of things, and the walls are paper thin. So I know, absolutely know, that our housemate would have heard everything.
Awkward.
Yeah, pretty fucking awkward. But she was one of those very non-confrontational types, very quiet, and would never have in a million years even addressed it. There was once my partner actually got a teaching job. She was doing quite well there. She made a bunch of her own friends, and it was a weird time actually, because I wanted to be independent. I wanted to make my own friends, but I was so stuck in this feeling of needing to be the proper husband type that I wouldn't stay out. I wouldn't go out drinking with any uni buddies or anything. I would make sure I was always heading home. And I was trying to think about this earlier, trying to think about whether my partner actually specifically asked me to always be home or check up on me. I don't know.
Probably just an unspoken rule.
And I think that's probably it. There was definitely a lot of inference there, a lot of reading between the lines of what was expected.
Well, you
built up over years. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, at this point we'd been together must have been 5 years already, and so yeah, I would always come home and make sure I was home. And then she started to make her own friends, and there was one distinct memory I have where she went out with her friends, and I was trying to find out where she was, but then things kind of escalated because she basically refused to tell me where she was, because she didn't want to have to tell me what she was up to. It was just such a weird flipping of the script, where all of a sudden she felt like she wanted to be independent and wanted to have her own life and her own friends and not have to be checked up on. And when she eventually did come home, we had this massive fight where she was just yelling at me, where I took a lot of it. I tried to explain that it's not very fair that you're treating me now like I'm some jealous lover checking up on you all the time, where you're out late at night and you're just refusing to tell me, and now I'm the one who is the bad guy for checking up on you. And
if the shoe was on the other foot too.
It became a screaming situation, and I talked about in the last one about out of control rage, and it became one of those situations. And she stormed out. I remember this, and I remember trying to stop her leaving, just to don't leave scenario. And she hurt herself because she pulled away and fell into a door or something. And the only reason I'm saying this is a significant story is because she ended up telling all her friends about it, and all her friends believed that I had been hurting her on purpose. And she told me about this later, and she told me that, oh no, she'd tried to reassure them that actually, no, it wasn't him, it was just an accident. But the fact that she'd gone to
too late.
Yeah, she'd told them the story and then took it back, but it was an attention. The whole thing was like an attention thing, and then telling me about it as well. So then I've got this additional guilt attached to it and fear of what other people are thinking about me. That's just one example of the kind of messed up dynamics that we had.
Manipulative behavior and emotional abuse, isn't it? If we're labeling it, that's what it is.
Yeah, and I just felt. I remember it was such a weird time for me because I was having the time of my life, kind of, the time of my life in this dream destination that I'd always wanted to be in.
But just under the surface, it's
So I spent a lot of time on my own, because I just wanted to get away. I was just hoping for distractions, and I found a lot of distractions, not in traditional distractions of going out and drinking or whatever. It was just very wholesome stuff, walking around and going and seeing all these museums and exploring parts of London. But then coming home and just feeling this weight, like this intensity of, well, it was just tension. It was just tension all the time. And also the knowledge that we had a housemate who would have heard everything that goes on, knowing how unhealthy it was, and pretending that they were pretending that they didn't know, and I was pretending that they
it's the elephant in the room all the time.
Oh my God, it was tough. Anyway, through this, I have to just flick it back to you, because it was about this time that my partner and I became aware of some of the stuff that was going on with you.
Yeah, I guess there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. I think I'd been toying with the idea of leaving for like 6 months because I was getting so fed up of, it's kind of hard to explain. There was just nothing. I can't say that he was horrible to me, like in the same way what you were experiencing. There was nothing, like nothingness, vanilla, bland nothingness.
There was no passion.
No, about anything. And I found that really, really hard. And I was loving my time in London at this point. I was making friends and I was going out lots because, obviously coming from the Christian background and not having eyes on me sort of in London, I felt like I could really enjoy myself, whereas he would just sit at home and play video games and like didn't have any friends and was depressed. And I guess during this time was when we kind of just started growing apart, and I wanted him to feel something, anything towards, not just towards me, but about life. And I was excited to get out and explore and travel and meet people, and he was just like, eh. And so I just became really unhappy. And I guess this was towards the end of 2010. And we just started growing apart and sleeping in separate rooms. And that's, I guess, when it started to fall apart. And
because when we arrived, you were kind of pretending, right? You were pretending that everything was okay. Because you at that stage, so it was your partner, he confided in us that you guys had actually been, on the verge of separating, and that you had been in separate rooms, and now you were just sleeping together in the same room for our benefit, and then just pretending, and we had no idea.
And he didn't really talk to me. He wasn't a great communicator at all. So I'd be like, just tell me what's wrong. And he just couldn't talk to me. And it was quite frustrating to be around. And in the end, I guess I found out that he'd been talking to other girls online, probably because I was out all the time with my friends. He was just at home online, and that just kind of led to him talking to other people. And so that was sort of the deciding factor of like, I'm not doing this anymore. And
because it's funny, because at that time he kind of approached my partner and I to kind of help with the situation. It was a bit awkward to get involved, but we were both trying to encourage him to firstly communicate with you how he was feeling, but then also to try and do something to help save it if it was that bad. And I guess it's like the same thing what you were saying, he found it really hard, or he just didn't do anything. And I think it was at some point while we were there that he did have a conversation with you where I don't know. I don't really know the conversation. All I know is that he told us that you weren't willing to carry on. And it was quite a big deal because we had to kind of comfort him, and because we didn't know the whole story at that stage.
Mm.
But we were naturally inclined to take his side because he'd come to us about it.
Mm. And but this had been going on for quite a few months, so it wasn't just something that I had decided. I just got to a point where I was so unhappy with trying to carry the weight of his unhappiness, and not that that's necessarily a quick reason just to ditch someone, but it was stuff, I won't go into the details of it, but it was over a period of, say, 6 months. And then in the end, I was just like, I can't do this anymore. It's dragging me down. And I ended up moving out and staying with a friend of mine, which wasn't ideal. She was a drug addict. I was staying in her flatmate's room, who also was a drug addict, but was never there. And I was instructed that if I get a text message saying she's turning up, you get all your stuff and you get out of that room because she will flip.
Jesus.
So it was a really, it was kind of scary living there, but I was doing my best just to carry on with, leaving that shit at home and going to work and putting a smile on my face. And I had a good nanny job at the time. And
well, just to go back a little bit in terms of the relationship between you and I, that had been a little bit, there'd been a lot of physical distance, but then a lot of distance in all fronts between you and I for quite a number of years. We didn't really stay in contact that much through that whole period. But then when I moved to London, of course, it was starting to feel good to reconnect, right? It was a bit awkward at first.
We were hanging out and stuff quite a lot.
Yeah. And it was quite nice.
You guys didn't really know anyone, and we didn't, we'd been there for a couple of years, but yeah, we were hanging out quite a lot, and it was nice.
But it was this breakup which actually got in the way of that. And I was just going to talk about the way that I reacted to it, because it's actually, with some time apart, between now and then, I've actually been able to understand a lot more about why I reacted the way that I did. So I found it incredibly difficult when I first heard about you separating, and I just couldn't deal with it. And at the time I thought it was just, it sounds too strong to say like an amoral act, but when I come from my moral compass, the act of marriage was a sacred thing, right? And so I believed it was the wrong thing to quit. And because I had an understanding of how hard I had to fight to make a marriage work. And so basically what happened is, once I found that out from your partner, your ex-partner, and then I remember finally talking to you about it and finding out that was true. I think I was saying something, I don't remember the conversation very clearly, but I remember trying to convince you to give it a go, and you just weren't interested. And I don't think that conversation ended very well.
I can tell you exactly how the conversation went, because it hasn't left. So I didn't want to get upset about this. This is like 2010. This is so many years ago. But I will never forget the moment, because you asked to meet up with me in the mall in a public place, and you brought my ex along with you. And after a short conversation, we didn't even sit down, you said you didn't want anything to do with me anymore. And to be honest, that was harder for me than the actual breakup, because I'd already emotionally removed myself, like, in terms of the breakup. And you didn't really even hear my side of the story. It was, I think, probably more because you were friends with him. He had spoken to you. And I remember just watching you and him walk away, and I was left gobsmacked. And I didn't know what to do. And I had to try and, we're in the mall, we're in a public place, had to try and hold it together. And that was really tough for me, because at the time I didn't have any real friends. And also on top of that, it was weird, I'd had a message from Mum, a text, and I was away at the time for work. I think I was in France. And she just said, "Is everything okay with you? I feel like there's something wrong." And I can't remember what I'd said back to Mum, but she got really weird with me. Obviously, being Christian, you don't separate, and you definitely don't divorce. And so basically Mum and Dad stopped talking to me for a long time. And that was when I really needed, his support. So yeah, that was a really hard time being on my own.
I'm not proud. I'm definitely not proud of the way that I acted. And like I say, I only understand it now. I was really angry, but I realized that I wasn't actually angry at you. I was just mostly angry at myself because I realized that I could never walk away as easily as you did. And it's it kind of like, in a weird way, a repeat scenario of what had happened with your ex back in Tauranga, where you had been able to say enough was enough, and then you left. And from the very beginning, I knew that I could never leave my ex, that all the shit that I had been through, and yet somehow I knew that I was stuck with it
I understand
forever.
that now, and the way she was, and I understand why you reacted like that. I guess it just, at that time, I wasn't expecting it. I really wasn't. I thought we were just going to sit down and chat, and it was just like this bomb of emotion, and it was in a public place, and it was just like, what the fuck just happened? And
I don't even I understand it, sure, but it's knowing how much I understand myself now, it's so out of character for me to even do that, to act in that way, and to also not deal with it as well. There was just so much going on in my head, and I think that was just the cherry on the top. And after this, we didn't talk.
No, it was probably nearly a year.
In fact, I could say that it was a year later, you sent me a message about wanting to meet up. And I was like, well, actually, we had already left the UK. And I had never even told you. Yeah, I was a low point. A low point for me.
Yeah, that was a tough time. And not having any support at all, I'd get the occasional text from Mum, but I knew it was just like a tick box of like, okay, I've messaged my daughter today. And this was really when I started trying to reinvent myself. I was like, right, fine, I've got to do this on my own. I've got to be strong. And I tried to reinvent myself and really got into fitness, and because I've always been a bigger girl, I guess I wanted, I don't know, I wanted to be validated. I wanted to be desirable, and, all those things. I'd been in a relationship for, at this point, it must have been about 7 years, I think, all up. And so I started getting into fitness and got a personal trainer, and I was running, and I lost a huge amount of weight. I lost like 23 kilos and was feeling good, and I was going out with my friends all the time. And so basically it was beginning of 2011, for like a year and a half, I just was I went wild. I was like, I don't have anybody to live for. I don't have anything stopping me. I'm just going to do what I want. And I did. And it was unfulfilling. But
makes for great stories. And I think maybe we can save them for the next episode, because there's at least a couple of years worth of stuff there that we've not talked about, certainly in no great detail. So I think it would be great to kind of focus on that in an episode on its own. And then there's also more for me to share about my experience in London and the move back to Melbourne and carrying on with the next few years. But yeah, so we'll pause it there. We'll keep chatting. We've got a lot more to talk. But join us again for the next episode of Who Loses It First.
If only you could see my flushed face right now.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining us, and tune in soon for our next episode of This Is Our Story.